Good morning to the Honorable Ministers of the Council, members of the media, online viewers, radio listeners via St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9 FM and respective radio stations island-wide. I'm Rolika Roach, and welcome to the live Council of Ministers press briefing for today, Wednesday, June 5th, 2019. At this time, I invite the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport, the Honorable Wycliffe Smith, to address you. Minister Smith.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roach. Greetings to all gathered here this morning, my colleague minister, the Department of Communications, members of the press, as well as those listening and viewing via radio, TV, or social media. Good morning, Sualiga. Yesterday, my team and I were able to conclude our responses to an urgent public meeting of Parliament that was requested on May 17th, 2019, after 2 rounds of questions and answers regarding the effects of the lump sum subsidy system on the operations of the SVOBA and FAVE school boards. The ministry maintains its willingness to discuss with school boards that are experiencing difficulties in meeting their financial obligations. This is with the expectation of audited accountability of subsidy that was already received and used by the school boards. Just a clarification on vacation salaries. I would like to state, for clarity's sake, that the information that was published earlier this week in the media concerning vacation allowances is an inaccurate representation of the current situation, that the school boards and, as a result, that the schools and staff find themselves in. The government, through the lump sum system, covers all costs that are associated with personnel expenses. This includes all salaries linked to the functions listed in the function book as laid down in the Education Remuneration Decree, including the vacation salary. It must be stated that although government subsidizes school boards for the provision of education, school boards as private entities and as employers of personnel remain responsible for the proper management of allotted funds in such a way as to meet their basic obligations to their employees. We must at all times be very mindful that the taxpayers' money must be spent wisely by government and by extension by those who receive funds or subsidies from the government. Subsidized funds should be carefully accounted for and used for what they are allocated for. For this reason, the vacation allowances of teachers and school staff should be paid by all subsidized school boards as scheduled, because included in the subsidies that school boards receive is also the vacation allowance for teachers and for the school staff. The National Decree on the School Subsidy System was published on the Government Information page on Monday, June 3rd, 2019. An allowance of 7 weeks is provided for the ordinance to be reviewed by the Office of the Ombudsman before its enactment. With the publication of this national decree, the ordinance will go into enforcement on July 4th, 2019, ahead of the opening of the school year 2019-2020. Let me publicly extend congratulations to the team of the Department of Education, who worked with great motivation, who worked tirelessly and enthusiastically over the last couple of years to complete the national decree containing general measures with regard to the funding of education. I'm extremely proud of each one of them and the sacrifices that they made towards the finalization of this legislation. I also want to thank here all previous ministers of education who started and continued the process to get this legislation to where it is today, and for which I was fortunate to have been the one to be able to finalize it. With this piece of legislation, we hope to be able to have a better grip on the financing of our schools. UNESCO Associated Schools Green Dream Project. UNESCO Associated Schools, the Mac Braulio Millard Campus, the Mac St. John's Campus, and the Mac High School will be participating in the Expo for Environmental Awareness organized by the Préfecture and the Collectivité of French Saint Martin that will be held on the Marigot waterfront on June 7th and June 8th. The schools are participating in the event in commemoration of World Environmental Day, which is actually today, Wednesday, June 5th, 2019. The schools will give presentations on their sustainable waste management project, known as the Green Dream Project, which has been coordinated by Claude Javois. The elementary schools will share the importance of protecting our environment, and they'll share that on Friday, June 7th at 3 p.m., while the high school will give its presentation the next day, on Saturday, June 8th at 3 p.m. Please show them your support. The LIFE project, I want to say something about that. That's the Learning is for Everyone project. The Learning is for Everyone project, also a UNESCO-sponsored program, which aims to administer a psychoeducational evaluation to students identified by the school system as having learning challenges or behavioral difficulties that negatively impact their ability to learn. The project is executed by Dr. Julienne Augusti, mental health therapist, and by Judith Martin Bell, the project coordinator. The evaluation or test assess the child's cognitive ability, academic achievement levels, information processing ability, and general emotional and behavioral issues. These evaluations also measure the emotional, behavioral functioning and their impact on the child's academic success. A total of 20 students will be evaluated during the course of this project, meaning they will be observed and they will receive their psychoeducation results, their academic intervention plan, and individual educational plan. Participating schools so far are the Hillside Christian Schools, the Methodist Agogic Center, both campuses, and the Sister Borgia School. The Prominent Women Foundation has also secured UNESCO funding for its Empower Our Women project. The foundation will be launching its 4-month English as a Second Language, ESL, project on Tuesday, June the 9th at 5:30, and that will be from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. at the SOIL. That means the Source of Inspirational Learning, and their new location is in St. John's Estate, and that's with Dr. Rhoda Arundel as the facilitator. This year, the ESL program will also be open to men in the community. Other trainings that will be offered include computer training and workshops to boost and build self-esteem and self-confidence. For more information about the UNESCO-funded projects and the MAC School Board Sustainable Waste Management Project, you can contact Secretary General for the UNESCO, Marcelia Henry at 520-3051 or henrymarcelia@gmail.com. The third and the final registration period for new students who wish to enter the public school system for the academic year 2019-2020 that began on June the 3rd and goes on until June the 14th, 2019. Parents, you are asked to register your children at the school closest to your home. The schools processing registrations are Ruby La Vega School, the Marie Genevieve de Weaver School, the Martin Luther King School Junior, and the Leonald Connor School, as well as the Oranyo School. At the Oranyo School, they're currently hosting their Book Week 2019, and the program is doing well. The first Book Week was held in 1968, some 33 years ago, and I was privileged to be at the opening of that very first Book Week. And now, 33 years later, I was again able to encourage the students at the Oranyo School to read and to read and to read more. Congratulations to the teachers and to the managers for organizing such a fun-filled way of engaging our children with reading. Thank you also to the parents and to the students for the efforts that you have shown and your level of participation that makes this event so commendable. Remember, readers are leaders, so keep on reading. Congratulations to the Lion King production. Over the weekend, I attended the opening of the Lion King St. Martin production. It was truly a magnificent display of local talent. Congratulations to the producers, the organizers, the staff, cast, and all who played a supporting role. Hard work certainly pays off. And this production does St. Martin very well. It shows that our creative industry is thriving, and also it demonstrates another marketable aspect of our culture. Congratulations to Malcolm Phillips. Also, over the weekend, Malcolm Phillips returned to the Cara box in Curacao, and he walked away with another victory under his belt. He is now the two-time champion for this regional event in the 69-75 kilogram weight division. Congratulations to Malcolm, to his teammate Stephen Duzon, who also did well, and to their coach, Earl Duzon. You are certainly representing St. Martin well, and we are proud of you. Remember, sports matter. As a reminder, within a few days, the 2019 budget debates will resume in Parliament, and the Ministry of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport is presenting an amount of 123,406,326 guilders. That's the budget of our ministry. And this is approximately 25% of the national budget, with 65% of the ministry's budget, our own budget, going towards school subsidies. Tune in to the presentation via the government channels for further details when the budget debate will take place. Thank you for watching and for listening, and I will be available for questions that you may have. Do have a very pleasant day.
Thank you, Minister Smith, for your opening remarks. At this time, I invite the Minister of Public Health, Social Development, and Labor, the Honorable Emil Lee, to address you. Minister Lee.
Good morning, colleague, members of the media, those listening by radio, television, or internet. I have one topic I'd like to touch on today, and it has to do with the level playing field in the reconstruction of our economy. The philosophy of government and the Ministry of VSA has always been that St. Martin business and people must come first. And in our reconstruction process, of course, the rebuilding of structures is important, but in our opinion, it's equally important that the economy is rebuilt. And that means that local companies, local employees must be part of the process. And this philosophy is reflected in various documents. Number one, in the St. Martin National Recovery and Resilience Plan, if you look in there, in Section 3, it says Guiding Principles to Enhance Recovery and Resilience. And there's a section here about inclusive, people-centered approach. The people of St. Martin must be fully engaged in actual implementation and monitoring of the recovery and resilience interventions. All NRRP initiatives should reflect and promote gender equity and social inclusion of the country's most vulnerable populations. Another document, and this is the Trust Fund administrative arrangement that's signed between the Netherlands and the World Bank. And in this agreement, there's an annex, and if you go to the very end, it says there's two principles that will be followed, of which the first is value for money. Local labor will be used to the greatest possible extent, and within the framework of the procurement regulations of the bank, attention will be given to opportunities for local companies to take part in the implementation. So the point that I'm making is that this philosophy is reflected in government, in its governing program, but it's also reflected in documents specifically related to the reconstruction process for St. Martin. But in order for this to happen, there must be a level playing field. All companies, whether they're local or foreign entities, must adhere to our laws, and that means to our tax legislation and to our labor legislation, which have all been designed around making sure that St. Martin comes first. So the recovery process of St. Martin is ongoing and has required the support of international companies that have come with skilled foreign laborers that we did not have available locally. The ministry, of course, is also actively working to train people who are interested in participating in the reconstruction economy via our skills training program. And for example, we have the construction courses where, again, the graduates have had a very high rate of placement in the labor market as soon as they finish their courses. These companies are also required to adhere to our local labor laws and employment processes. And I'd like to just take an example of a relief organization. There's a relief organization that's been here since after Irma, doing good work on the island. And the relief organization required one or two highly skilled experts trained not only in the reconstruction process, but also in the specific ways that this relief organization handles their aid process. It was established that we did not have these experts available locally. And it was also established that a training process would delay the recovery process. And so we made an exemption for them, actually all we really did is expedited their process and facilitated the process for them to get the permits that they required. So they were not exempted from the requirements to have permits, but given the urgency for the reconstruction process, we made sure that the process was smooth and rapid. So we all agree that it's in the best interest of our economy that we're flexible in order not to delay the reconstruction process. But this flexibility also has to be balanced against making sure that we have local involvement in our projects. And the ministry is working together with companies to ensure that they are compliant with our laws. So that means local and foreign entities must contribute and must remain compliant to our tax and social premium legislation while adhering to mandatory permit requirements. And therefore, exemptions for any of these foreign entities, in my opinion, would create an unlevel playing field, putting our local companies, our local people at a disadvantage. So our philosophy is rule for one, rule for all. If we're going to find an expedited process for highly skilled reconstruction staff, that exemption or that expedited process applies to all companies, whether they're local or foreign. So we believe that policies need to be made and the policies need to apply to everybody across the board. Our labor inspectors have and will continue to go out on controls and make sure that our rules are being adhered to. And I, as Minister of VSR, are certainly encouraging fellow ministers to execute multidisciplinary controls, in particular with immigration. We do recognize that there's too many people on the island without the proper documentation, and ultimately we believe this has to be a collaborative effort between the ministries to improve our compliance in St. Martin. For any companies who have questions or are unclear about the procedures, please feel free to reach out to the ministry and the Department of Labor in specific. Thank you very much.
We now move on to the question and answer session. Lyndon Brown of BCN TV, you have the floor.
Good morning to the people of St. Martin and to the ministers that are here present today. Question to Minister Smith. Minister Smith, a couple of weeks from now, we'll be celebrating Emancipation Day. There have been a known string band by the name of Tanny and the Boys, which one of the members are sick in Santo Domingo as I speak. Is it in your plan that you will make special recommendation for only string band and St. Martin during Emancipation Day?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Brown. The Emancipation Day celebration, which takes place on July 1st, is currently being planned immediately after this meeting. I have a meeting with the Department of Culture and the Secretary General in which we will go over the plans. So I'd be able to give you more details after that meeting, or certainly in our next press briefing. You will get a detailed outline as to what will take place, but I know that the Department for Culture, they're busy planning something grand again. I don't know if you were at the one last year, the celebration last year, but that was a grand Emancipation Day celebration, and this one is going to be just as grand or even better.
Thank you, Minister Smith. Stephen Cerulean of PJD2 Radio, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Roach. Good morning to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of ESA. My question is for the Minister of ECYS. Your pronouncement of the budget debate to be had in Parliament soon, you spoke of over $1 million or guilders. Guilders. How much of that money is allotted to sports in particular?
To the sports department, they are allocated somewhere. I don't have the exact figure right now in my head, but approximately maybe 2.5 million, between 2 and 3 million guilders per year for the sports department.
Thank you, Minister Smith. We now move on to the second round of questions. Lyndon Brown, you have the floor.
Question to Minister Lee. Minister Lee, recently you gave special recommendation to people coming to St. Martin to engage in employment in the construction field. You said also that you're going to give them permit to work for 1 year. Has that year already come to its time? Did the time run out? It is close to be running out.
Good morning, Mr. Brown. Thank you for your question. I think what you're referring to is the incidental work permit. The incidental work permit, as you recall, was issued for large projects. Once it was determined that there was not sufficient local labor available, and that it was a project-specific incidental permit, right? So in other words, tied to a specific project, and once the project is completed, the permits would expire and they were not renewable. They had to adhere to our tax and social premium legislation. They had to provide them with housing because we were very cognizant that we didn't want an influx of foreign workers coming in, disturbing our already tight housing market. So we didn't want them competing with locals for housing, driving up the rental prices. So they had to provide housing for the workers. And so it was not tied to 1 year, it was tied to the completion of a specific project. And I think in particular, probably referring to the Maho project. And as I understand, they are starting to complete their construction, and therefore those workers will leave as soon as the project's completed.
I will allow a follow-up.
If I remember, Minister Lee, you said that it will be for 1 year in your discourse, couple of months, and then after the 1 year, they will have to leave the island.
I believe the
if I-
permits are for 1 year, and they could be renewed if the project was not completed, but it is tied specifically to a project, and once the project's completed, they cannot renew to stay on the island after that. So the permits are issued in a 1 year increment. If the project isn't completed, they could renew, but then it's again tied to the project itself.
Okay, Minister Smith.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'd like to give Mr. Cerulean the correct amount that is allocated to the Department of Sports. The correct amount is 2,673 guilders, 673,901 guilders.
Thank you, Minister Smith.
Thank you.
Stephen Cerulean, you have the floor.
Thank you again, Ms. Roach. Deputy Prime Minister, I take it that you're the one responsible for general affairs in that setting, so I'll have to address the question to you. The Central Bank of the Netherlands and the Minister of Finance have jointly sent a letter to the second chamber, basically saying that we have no confidence in the Central Bank of Curacao and St. Martin. They also made mention of the fact that a president of the central bank has not been appointed. I'm sure you have taken note of that press release coming from the two persons or entities. What's your reaction? Because the Central Bank of Curacao and St. Martin just a while ago issued a press release saying that they believe strongly that they can be strengthened with the appointment of a president.
Well, thank you very much for that explanation. The Minister of Finance, as we speak, is currently in Curacao to discuss the whole matter of the central bank. And so I would rather not deal with that now and wait until he has been able to come back and report on the discussions that they're having right now.
Thank you, Minister Smith. We now move on to the third round of questions. Lyndon Brown, you have the floor.
Question to Minister Lee. Minister Lee, it is illegal to employ illegal workers, okay? There have been a development a couple days ago that a member of the parliament mentioned that it is illegal to rent your apartment to illegal person. Minister Lee, can you elaborate on these two items? Illegal workers and renting your apartment to illegal person.
To the first part of your question, clearly hiring of undocumented workers is not legal. It is one of the tasks of the ministry through the inspectorate. They have labor inspectors that go out and do regular controls, and indeed we find regularly undocumented workers being employed. The employers are notified that it's illegal. They're given a period of time to correct. They're given a form to comply. There's possibility of fines. There's possibility of a process verbal being filed with the prosecutor's office. Unfortunately, the labor inspectors do not have immigration authorities, so they're not allowed to restrain or deport individuals. So that's why each of the different departments has different authorities. But indeed, the hiring of undocumented workers is not legal. To your second point about the renting of apartments to illegals, I'm not aware of that. If you think about it, for example, you have individuals on the island who rent their apartments via Airbnb to foreign tourists who are not residents. And so there's obviously, it does happen that apartments are rented to people who are not residents here. So I'm not sure what basis you're making that statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Lee. Stephen Cerulean, you have the floor.
Thanks again. Minister Lee, my question is for you. I think it was 3 months ago you mentioned that you were looking at the feasibility of establishing or constructing a multi-purpose shelter. How far ahead are you with the plans towards realizing this shelter?
Thank you. If you recall at the time, what we mentioned was that there is a proposal for a multifunction shelter where a large structure could be used to possibly house the library, CMARC, and museum, as well as function as a cultural center, sports center, and conference center. That proposal was discussed in Council of Ministers and agreed that it would be sent to the steering committee for evaluation. They're still in the process of doing their preliminary evaluations. In the meantime, actually, we've had an opportunity to have a conversation with a rather large delegation from the TU Delft, an engineering school in Holland. Minister Smith and myself actually met with them. And there's different levels within that, so there's actually some doing their thesis projects as well. And we're actually using them or engaging them in the discussion about the construction of a multi-purpose shelter. And some of them are using this topic as part of their study. So they're doing different, studying different aspects of the feasibility of it, possible designs, etc. So while we're waiting for an answer from the steering committee, we are still working on, I think, a very cost-effective way to come up with different concepts to move forward with the project.
Thank you, Minister Lee. We now move on to the final round of questions. Lyndon, you have the floor.
Final question to Minister Smith. Minister Smith, languages matters. Most people in St. Martin speak in at least three different languages, which is English, Spanish, and Dutch. Well, maybe four too, and French. Minister, languages have financial benefit. Is there any thinking about make at least 4 languages available for the people of St. Martin? We have found there's a lot of
Mr. Brown, can you just ask your question directly?
inconsistency. For instance, most of our document is in Dutch. And people who cannot speak Dutch will have to get a translation. So if you have anything in plan, could you let the people of St. Martin know exactly what you have?
Minister.
Mr. Brown, as you know, our school system is multilingual. In primary schools, our children are mandated to learn 2 languages, Dutch and English, English and Dutch. We have Dutch schools where Dutch is the language of instruction and English is also taught, but you have English schools where English is the language of instruction and Dutch is taught as the second language. In our secondary schools, all the languages are taught. You have secondary schools where Spanish and French, Dutch and English are taught. So already our school system is geared towards ensuring that our children get the opportunity and are able to learn multiple languages.
Thank you, Minister Smith. Stephen Cerulean, you have the final question.
The Minister of ESA, Emily, Dr. Hespitalis of CAFA, that's the Caribbean Health Agency, said during a panel discussion with the start of the hurricane season, he strongly feels that enough is not being done to educate the masses, or governments throughout the Caribbean region in particular is not doing enough to educate its inhabitants. sure this is one thing you probably are looking at very closely. What is your ministry doing to ensure that residents are brought up to speed in terms of what they need to do to safeguard themselves health-wise during hurricane?
Thank you, Stephen. You know, the ministry has constant outreach campaigns to educate the public from a health perspective. You know that as with the hurricane season comes the rainy season as well. We still have quite a bit of debris, derelict houses, all types of objects around the island that collect water that become breeding sites for mosquitoes. So from that aspect, we're always very active in terms of educating the population. I think to your point, in terms of being better prepared, as a matter of fact, just this week we're preparing to send a letter out to the schools where we're trying to engage, because very often we found in the past that sometimes engaging the youth in these discussions is very, very effective, because what they learn doing their research, preparing projects, very often that it's a better way to sort of enter into the different homes, that as the youth learn, they in turn educate their parents and the other members of their household. And I think the focus of it is much broader. It encompasses hurricane protection, but it also encourages more about long-term planning, financial planning. So it encompasses things like insurance. You know, how do you, what is a correct kind of insurance to buy? How do you manage your risks? So managing risks is a combination of how you protect your home, but also what insurances, for example, you may purchase. Goes back to our discussions about general health insurance as well, right? As you manage your lifetime savings, how do you protect the savings that you've earned to make sure that when you get older and sick, that those savings aren't depleted in healthcare expenses? So we're taking the topic in a much broader context, but certainly incorporates the how do you protect yourself, how do you plan for what type of strategies you have in place to manage natural disasters as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Lee. Honorable Ministers of the Council, members of the media, radio listeners, and online viewers, this brings us to the end of the live Council of Ministers press briefing for today, Wednesday, June 5th, 2019. For rebroadcast, tune in every evening at 7 p.m. on St. Martin Cable TV. For video on demand, log on to the official government's website at stmartingov.org. On behalf of the Department of Communication, I'm Rolika Roach, and bidding you a pleasant day further.